Okay, so many of you are asking me about some of the things that I'm putting in the comments that I'm making to you in the grading. I actually had assumed that this had been explained before, but if not, or if you need a refresher, then we'll do it now. I posted last week the how I grade based on the rubrics, which I encourage you to look at for all of your assignments. But there are also some other functions that go into this as well. Now, what you see before you right now is the course learning guide for this course. You're going to have one of these for every course that you take, right? You know what this looks like. In fact, you kind of had to start there, the course guide. All right, so in the beginning here, after we get through the table of contents, the course at a glance has your course description, your course design, and your CLOs. These are the course learning outcomes. This is what you are supposed to be accomplishing in the course itself and by the end of it. And every week, the assignments that you have, from the discussions to the quizzes to the papers and assignments themselves, are all designed to address at least one or more of these course learning outcomes. All right, so that's what we mean when we talk about CLO 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are all the things that we, by the end of the course, want you to be able to do. Each week has the required text and your required resources. This means these are ones that you have to use in the course of answering either the discussion, depending, or the assignment or the quiz, right? And required means exactly that. A lot of you seem to be going off the page and using different sources. No, in this day and age of places like Course Hero, AI, etc., there's a specific reason these texts are required, and that's because we want to make sure that this is the information you're actually using and that you yourself are using it, that it's not coming from somewhere else. So if you go outside of the required sources, then I have to count down because you're not using what you're actually supposed to be doing. Right? All right, so here's the course grading. The discussions total represent 5%, quizzes represent 20, the assignments themselves 30, and the final project 25, right? This is your grading percentage breakdown. Then you get into each week, and it shows you what you have due each week. But then right under that, it has this, your weekly learning outcomes. These are the WLOs. These are what you're supposed to be doing in each week that fits back to the course learning outcomes. So when you look at any assignment, and from this point, I'm going to let you know, the weekly learning outcomes are more specific to what we're actually talking about that week. Like for this past week, week 1, it was all about the medieval period, and the ancient period for the most part. Like the women's roles in Greece and Rome was discussion 1, women in early societies was the quiz, and then the medieval women's contributions to culture was what the assignment was. So with that in mind, let's go to the assignment. So you'll notice with the assignment, the first thing you get are your WLOs and your CLOs. The WLOs for this assignment were the weekly learning outcomes were numbers 2 and 4, and the course learning outcomes were 1 and 4. Right? So to know what those are, you can go back to your course guide, the course learning outcomes at the beginning, the weekly learning outcomes in the week under the assignments themselves. So here are the required readings and work for this particular assignment. You needed Chapter 3 of Women Artists from Antiquity to the Present by Slatkin. That's the required course textbook. Women Writing in Medieval Europe, Chapter 7. And then the video segments that are listed here, which both also have transcripts. You also needed to understand analyzing creative works, because one of the things you were supposed to do was literally analyze works by each of the 3 women that you pick. Now, your instructions: write a paper in which you examine how women in the medieval world contribute to culture in 3 of the following 4 categories. For each category, evaluate whether this type of work was an expected role for women in a certain time and place. If women's contributions in this category were unusual, assess how women could step outside of their normal roles to work in this category. These go towards those CLOs that are up here and the WLOs. In this case, it is the compare and contrast in certain respects what was expected of women traditionally and how these artists particularly did differently from that. Include a minimum of one specific example for each of the three categories. And when we go to the rubric in just a second, this will explain to you why you needed a specific woman or at least a specific piece of art from each of those categories. Include images of these examples when available, such as a specific embroidery or an illuminated manuscript or quote from musical lyrics and compositions. Okay, so that gives you what you're going to see in the rubric in just a second. These are the basic constraints, 3 to 5 double-spaced pages, APA-style format, which means you need a cover page and a works cited page at the end. Your cover page should have all of this information on it. The use of academic voice, and this explains what it is. It's basically third person. You must have an introduction and a conclusion paragraph. And you must have a stated thesis, which is what your intention is, what you plan to prove when writing this paper. You must use at least 2 scholarly courses in addition to the course text. So you should have a total of 3 sources in there, right? 3. Document in APA style, which means you have to have your internal citation, which is always required, and a separate reference page as well. Now, let's look carefully at the grading rubric for this particular assignment, because this is going to answer some of the other questions. And in the first video I did on how to grade, I told you I grade based on the rubrics. So you definitely need to be looking at those. For this particular one, sorry, I'll get it back in the entirety in the frame. Here's your rubric. And each of these categories are the same as what I did with the first one, distinguished, proficient, basic, below expectations, and non-performance. But these are what you're looking at. How women in the medieval world contribute to culture in 3 of the assigned categories. How the contributions compare to women's roles. That was that point where you needed to talk about what women were expected to do, and then how these women either fulfilled that in the course of what they were doing, or they defied that. And in this section also would be where you could have looked at the specifics of how they were obstructed or how men helped them. And that would have gone towards that CLO number 4, the analyze complex questions on gender dynamics in the creation of culture over time. And so this could have very well have been where, if you were using Kristen de Pizan, you could have used the fact that she was aided by her father in his library, that she was supported by her husband until both of them died, and that put her in the position of literally having to defend women because suddenly she was having to support herself and her family. The same could be said with the idea that often commissioned the works these women did, if you were looking at embroidery and textiles. And anywhere else that you were looking at the role that men also played in either helping or obstructing these women artists. All right, the next section discusses at least 3 examples of women's contributions, and these could have been either specific women, but it definitely had to be specific works. So even if we don't know exactly who created the Bayeux Tapestry, then you're analyzing that particular source. If you're looking at illuminated manuscripts, there were specific women, but there were also specific examples you could have used. So you're looking at those, and you have 3. And again, this is where you're going to also have your illustrations. Your control of syntax and mechanics, pretty straightforward. Page requirement, 3 to 5, double-spaced, and then APA formatting and resource requirement. These are going to go towards your internal citation and your use of the required sources. For those of you who went off the reservation, as it were, and used sourcing that was not in the required sourcing, you're going to get a non-performance here because you didn't use the actual required sources for this assignment, no matter how well it is. And to be fair, in these other categories, if you're not using the required sources, you're not going to get as high in these as you would because you're drawing these examples from other places. All right, so this is effectively what I'm looking at and what I'm required to look at when I am grading your assignments. Be sure for your discussions and for your assignments that you're using the required sources and getting the information from them, and that you are internally citing them. This is not just putting the work cited, this is the actual internal citation. I did a video on that and submitted it to you in the announcements last week as well. So if you have more questions, please email me. I'm more than happy to go into the specifics with you, but do review those course learning outcomes for the big objectives and then the weekly learning outcomes, which are specific to the assignments of that week as to what you need in them. All right, if you have questions, like I said, please let me know.